along the lines of, we brought you in as a producer, but I think we've got that one wrong.
Up he comes and drives it in! And England are through! Watkins, oh, he scored! Watkins from an impossible angle across Verbruggen and into the far bottom corner.
She wanted me to be an auctioneer. Actually, it's harder than it ever was to actually get to the top of the profession.
Flicked on, overhead kick from Bellingham!
And that's why I have the motivation, because I know that before too long, there'll be another match like that comes along. It's still an ongoing challenge for me because you can never get it right. It's like being on the stage. It's a live performance every time you commentate on a football match.
Saka now with a chance to cross, and Bellingham is there!
That's the area of the job that I find more difficult. My advice would be,
John, I just wanted to start with reading you a quote from yourself.
okay.
I read a fascinating interview with Living North and you, and the quote said, "I can't believe the position I am in now. Honestly, if you told me then what I was going to do, I wouldn't have believed you. I couldn't have thought it was possible." So my question to you is, what made it possible?
A lot of luck, I think, would be a part of that. And I suppose there must be a bit of drive there as well. Although I wouldn't necessarily think of myself as a driven person. I don't think that that's something that would be naturally part of my personality. But I think it was just a bit of I would say it was more of a determination than anything else. And, I'm not particularly somebody that has always massively believed in my own ability. I think that I see a lot of people who, would either be contemporaries or people that I've worked with or grown up with who I would say that about, and I wouldn't necessarily think that I was that. So therefore, I think luck was very important. I think attitude is important. That is one thing that I would say that I do have. I think that what I've always done is be willing and be available, and always sort of done what's asked of me. Basically, that's what I would say. Is that I've, that's one thing I was told actually when I was very early days starting out. Always say, what can you do? What can you do? How can you help? Is there anything else I can do? Simple things like that. And then I think once I started down this route, and I was doing I did a postgrad radio journalism 1-year course. And once I sort of started down that route, it was remarkably straightforward, really. And that involved a lot of luck. The people I worked with, and one little example of that is when I started working in local radio at TFM on Teesside, when I was working in news and sport, and that's where I started commentating for the first time. The person who really encouraged me to do that was Charlotte Nichol, who then, having been a colleague of mine, then moved to BBC Radio Sport in London as a broadcaster, actually. But she ended up as one of the radio football producers in the BBC Radio Sports department. And when I made my move there, I was really, really fortunate that the person who had actually encouraged me to commentate in the first place was now one of the people who made the decisions about who would commentate on Radio 5 Live. So, it's probably the biggest break I had like that. But there are lots of things where things just seem to fall into place. I mean, it can't be a complete accident. I think that's why I say I think you need the attitude. But it's looking back now, it's strange how it all just seemed to fall into place. And I found myself doing this job almost without knowing it.
Mm. And for me, doing some research about yourself, it seems like this is something that you always wanted to do. And I just want to go back and talk about your childhood, being raised on a farm in the Northeast, if that's correct. And you were one of 4 brothers, and your dad was one of 9 children. So quite a big family altogether. What was as early as you can remember, what was that like growing up? And when you first started to find that interest of wanting to be in radio? Because from the people I've spoke to so far, at some people have different stages where they think this is what I want to do. It can come quite young, or it can come in teens, into your late 20s. So what was it for you?
I think it would not be unusual among football commentators or sports journalists, I think, in my experience, for people to have that ambition from a young age. I think that there are people who come into it later, but I think lots and lots of people do have that ambition early. And for me, from my background, I think a big thing was that, as you mentioned, that I was one of 4 brothers on a hill farm, where there's not work for 4 brothers on a hill farm, and I was the youngest. And I think I've got lots of traits as well as the youngest of 4. You just have to you kind of get by. You have an easier ride. Definitely, you have an easier ride as the youngest of 4. I can say that. And again, I know others who are in a similar position, and we always agree that it's a great position to be in. You're better off being number 4 than number 1. And so therefore, I was always kind of encouraged by my mother, particularly, to look elsewhere and to think of other things. But again, it came naturally, because I don't think that farming wasn't something that, while I really valued what I had growing up on a hill farm in Northumberland, and the qualities that gave me, I don't think it was ever something that was likely to be my way of life and my profession and my work. So therefore, I was always sort of kind of encouraged to go elsewhere and look for something else, which I think my mother would have liked if it had been something agricultural related. I think she wanted me to be an auctioneer, actually. But, sport was big in our family, and that was always what I was looking to, really. But going back to the original question, I still found it hard to believe. It seemed just like a massive leap to go from where I was growing up and the upbringing that I had to being where I am now doing this. It does. That's why I say I would never have believed it if you'd said to me that I could go from that, which is a very singular life on a farm, to doing this job.
Would you say your mum would have been quite a big influence on yourself growing up?
Yeah, very much so. Big personality, and really. I mean, I think she was more driven than I was in terms of wanting me to do well for myself. And I was quite academic. And so she really massively encouraged that. So I think she was quite disappointed when I didn't do particularly well in my A levels. However, it all worked out in the end.
And so in terms of growing up and, as you start to get older, the one thing I find very interesting about people like yourself, John, is when they find that point where they're like, yep, this is what I want to do. And all of a sudden your motivations and your drive to succeed just skyrockets, through the roof. And when did that come for you? And do you remember a point where something happened, or your first job where you were like, yes, and then you really tunnel visioned?
It's interesting. My years at university, where I would say I was quite academic, I kind of had enough of academia by the time I got to university, really. And this is, I felt like I was already pointing myself in this direction. So by that stage, university years, 18 to 21, I'd already done a fair bit of work experience. I'd been into the local radio station in Newcastle. I had done some writing for the local paper in Northumberland. I had done a bit of hospital radio actually at school, which was a fortunate break, because it was actually a friend of mine at school who was dead keen on doing that and going in, and I just went along with that. But because I went along with it, I actually had it on my CV, and that was very, very significant, actually, because I'd shown a bit of interest in doing something like that. So it was, it was effectively on my CV. So in those years at university, while there was the academia, got my degree, I also do remember very well in the final year there going to the careers people there, and this careers advisor at SDUC in Lampeter in Wales. when we had our little discussion, he just said, "Have you ever thought about radio journalism, radio commentary?" To which I thought, that's exactly what I want to do. It really was that moment where I thought that it felt like it all came together, because I'd been I'd consumed all sorts of media at the time, but radio definitely resonated with me, and radio football commentary, radio sports commentary, massive Test match special listener. I listened to loads and loads of that, and so when he said that, and kind of just sort of gently eased me in that direction, that was the point where I thought, yeah, that is exactly what I want to do. That is sort of did open the pathway there. But in terms of but it was also not straightforward there either, because there were only really a handful of radio journalism courses in those days, and I applied for probably all of them, got turned down by almost all of them until the last one. It was my last chance, which was I think that was possibly even in the September of the summer after I finished my degree. And I got on that course. I got accepted on that course almost instantly in Darlington. And I honestly don't know what I would have done if I hadn't, but I did. So that was it. And that was it. And then I was on.
And so you're applying for all these, and what was your mindset like back then? Did you think that, you said this is exactly what I wanted to do? Did you think that was a realistic objective? Did you think that it was going to be easy to achieve? And what was your sort of mindset, thinking about those first early stages of breaking into the industry?
I think I did think that it would be a matter of course that I would get on one of those courses. But then when I eventually did them, and there was some incredibly difficult interview days. I remember a couple where they were like, it was like a mass interview, and it lasted all day, and there'd be like 25 or 30 of us on it. And I was quite intimidated by that, I must say. And yet the one I got on was just a one-on-one chat with a guy called Malcolm Wright, who was the course tutor. We had a chat for about 20 minutes. They said, "You're in." So, but you see, when I was at university as well, while I say there's the academia side, I was very, very heavily involved in the football club at university. We effectively ran the football club, and we played football every weekend in the local league, and we played midweek matches as well. It was almost like that's what I did there, and I also did the degree. The football club was so important to my 3 years at university, and I think that was quite a useful thing for me to have done, leading on to what came next. But then in the year, I did feel very much as though once I started doing that postgrad course, I felt that then suddenly I was now going in the right direction, and it was all very, very geared towards a career in radio or in journalism. And I was quite, those early years, that year and the next 2 or 3 years, I was quite driven that it would lead somewhere, even though where that was, I didn't know.
Did that give you confidence?
It did, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was all consuming then. And, we had a good team in the newsroom where I worked. I'm still close friends with almost everybody there. So we had a good team. There was a good bond. There was a great bond between us. So that helped as well. It was a real feel-good time, really. And even though I was doing mainly news as well as sport, and I hadn't started doing commentary then, football commentary, I just felt I was in the right place.
Yeah, because I want to sort of get on to actually being on the job and some of the challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis, operating in this industry. It can be quite wild at times, but to me, the sort of underlying tone to all of this is that you have to have that element of confidence and ability to put yourself out there. Is that something that came to you naturally, or was that something you had to work on?
I would say that I don't actually... I've never had that. I still don't have it. I just go and think it helps in doing radio, probably, because it's a smaller team, and it does feel, I quite like the feeling that it's on you, so that I'm less comfortable in the environment where it's a big team. I'm more comfortable in a radio environment. It's the nature of the medium that it is more intimate, and I kind of feel that I can take it wherever I want to take it. And the reason I say that I don't have that is that almost week by week, it still has, enormous challenges because of that. There's no, I don't have loads of people around me doing everything for me. I have to do it myself. And sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't. And that's still the case now, even though I've been doing it for decades. But you see, that's something that does appeal to me, and that appeals to me. That the lifestyle it is appeals to me. That works for me, you get hurdles put in your way every week doing this job, and you have to find a way past them. But I've almost got to the point where I've always been a bit of a last minute merchant, even from school onwards. And I think that's in common with a lot of people, and certainly a lot of people who do the job that we do. And you just have to adapt. You have to adapt. But I almost don't like it when I've got too much time, which I have at the moment, for example. When we're, here at the Euros, suddenly things have calmed down, and you do actually have a few days. So I've spent 3 days doing what I would normally do in 1 day here. But and I find that actually sometimes that actually puts you off kilter because you spend too much time preparing almost. But anyway,
why do you think that the lifestyle appealed to you?
I think it's a large part of that thing growing up. As I say, even though I was the fourth of four, I was a long way the youngest. So it was almost like being an only child in a big family. Because there was such a big age difference. And also, growing up on the farm, there was a lot of time. I spent a lot of time on my own. I had to entertain myself on my own. And this job is, you spend a lot of time on your own. Do it as a football commentator, whether it's working on your own, traveling on your own, traveling back late at night. But that doesn't particularly faze me. I'm quite comfortable in that environment.
You say you enjoy your own company?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I'm very, very. I mean, I like it. I like it when I'm able to meet up, which we do, obviously. I mean, I know so many, because I've done this for such a long time. I know so many people in our industry that, and come close to my colleagues as well. There's a very good social side to this, but it's only a limited period of time. I spend more time on my own.
Yeah, and speaking of the industry as a whole, obviously it's drastically different to what it used to be. When you first started off, and how have you found adapting to the likes of the social media environment and the presence of digital media and everything surrounding what the industry is now? And what do you think some of the biggest challenges are that we face as commentators and journalists that operate in this industry?
Yeah, dramatically changed. But some of the challenges that there were, there are so many similarities in terms of the challenges of, for people of your age, getting into the industry. It was hard when I was doing it. And even though there are many more outlets and opportunities now, I think it's harder than it ever was to actually get to the top of the profession. As I say, for me, it was a relatively straightforward route because there were few routes. There were that you had to go through a handful of certain ways to get to where you wanted to. Now you can take you can go so many different directions now, but there are probably many more dead ends now, and I find it, as I do speak to, as I say, a lot of people of your sort of age who are trying to get into it, and I see them. I think you've got great attitude. You've got the ability. I've listened to, people's commentary tapes. They're excellent. And I just think, how have they not been picked up by somebody? And yet, a point will come, I think, for people of that age where, real life reaches a point where they've got to either do it or do something else. Whereas I didn't have that. So I've got great sympathy there. And I think that once you're in, similarly, there are so many different routes to where you want to get to. But I think to get to the top of the profession is really, really tough. But it's there if you can find the right route.
And it's such a unique industry in a sense of the amount of free work that you have to put yourself forward for to, first of all, even get your foot through the door. And then once you get through the door, it's that slow build up of, entering your way and climbing up the ladder as such. And I wanted to ask you, just in terms of the job now, and obviously you're in Germany for the Euros. How have you found operating at the Euros and some of the games that you attend now and the way that you approach commentating? Has that changed?
I think what I'd say first of all as well, Lewis, is that I also did lots of different jobs when I was coming up here. I wasn't just broadcast then. I got a grounding in local radio with production skills, writing skills, as well as the broadcasting. And when I moved to the BBC in London, I actually moved there as a producer. So I when the job that I got was effectively working on the other side of the microphone, but very quickly got a couple of fortunate breaks there, which got me spotted as a broadcaster rather than a producer. And another big moment for me was when my editor at the time actually sat me down in his office and said along the lines of, "We brought you in as a producer, but I think we've got that one wrong." So I really remember that, and that was a one where I thought, there we are then. But about how the job's changed, I probably don't do the commentary dramatically different to how it did when I started, I think. But, with commentary, you just get better and better by doing it over and over and over and over again. And you just gain confidence from that. It's a bit like when I watch golfers on the range, if we're at the Open or whatever, and you see them there just playing shot after shot after shot after shot. And I always think, well, that's what we do, really. And in my early days, we did, I was in a very fortunate position where I started out. And once I started commentating on 5 Live at that stage had absolutely every competition, and it would be broadcast on 5 Live. There weren't any other channels. So therefore, I was getting opportunities 2-3 times a week, maybe even more. And I was in the shop window. I wasn't on Sports Extra, Talk Sport 2. I wasn't hidden away. I was on one of a few channels. So therefore, a lot of people heard me in my early days. And because of that, I was whether I was commentating on League 2, FA Cup, whatever it was, Premier League, people would hear me. So that was I was in the right place at the right time from that point of view. And maybe probably wasn't anywhere near the level that I would have liked to have been at, but because you just do it over again, week by week, year by year, you get to you just get to where I am now, sitting in Germany and waiting for England in the quarterfinal on Saturday.
And that idea, John, of being repetitive and doing things over and over again, in order to do that, you have to love what you do. So what is it that you love about being a commentator?
And also, I love working in radio sport. BBC Radio Sport means a lot to me. And I've worked with some of the people I work with are incredible. And I think you get a great deal from working with good people, for years and years and years. The way that we did it, almost every game that we did, there would be 2 commentators. So there'd be 2 commentators and a summariser. And I'd do first 20 minutes, hand over to Mike Ingham, hand over to Alan Green, whoever it happened to be. And we still do that occasionally with Ian Dennis. Ian and I will cover matches, and Ian, every time I work with Ian, I learn from Ian. Every time I would sit there as a young commentator alongside people like Peter Drury and John Champion, Rob Hawthorne, all of my colleagues, Simon Brotherton, certainly Mike Ingham, Alan Green, who were the main two commentators at that time, vastly experienced. And I would be sitting there with them, doing my job, but also having 20 odd minutes per half with that sort of work mindset, listening to them and watching them commentate on what I was watching. And I felt it was almost like an academy of commentary, even while I was doing the job. It was massive. I took a massive learning benefit from being in that position.
And what's the thing that keeps you ticking every day, John? Because obviously, again, repeating myself, being repetitive is so important, but there are a lot of times when you're doing the same thing over and over again, and especially commentating for games. I mean, the preparation must obviously, you've got different teams, different competitions, different venues, but what when you wake up in the morning and think, right, this is what I have to do today, what is the drive to do that? Where does that come from?
Well, I find the preparation quite hard work, and I'm not one of those who enjoys that massively. It's a bit of a chore, but I always feel that it's worthwhile in the end, and it makes me feel better. When I finished my preparation, it makes me feel better and I feel ready. And it's amazing, how often I will get a real buzz from trying to do what is the basic, trying to let people know what it's like being there at the ground when, like, the semi-final, the FA Cup semi-final this season between Coventry and Manchester United was one of the most amazing games that I've been at ever. And trying to put that into words, and the excitement and the emotions that were involved in everything that happened there. And that's why I have the motivation, because I know that before too long, there'll be another match like that comes along. I love the travel. I love going to places and trying to give people an idea of what it's like when you go to cover Champions League matches in Dortmund or wherever it happens to be. And as I said right at the outcome, it's still an ongoing challenge for me, because you can never get it right. It's like being on the stage. It's a live performance every time you commentate on a football match. There's no script there, apart from the old thing that you've written down. In the main, you are performing, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go well, and most of the time you're somewhere in the middle of that. And when it does go well, that's such a thrill, really. You're always casting out for that. You're always trying to get that. And there's no rhyme or reason why a match, a day, a night will be a good one or a bad one. And so you don't know. So it really keeps you on your toes. So therefore, it's a constant motivation. That's what I find it to be. And I feel that now the same as I did the first time I ever did.
Yeah, and I find that so interesting, because you would say that you want to tell people what it's like in the stadium and what it's like being amongst the atmosphere. But from an outside perspective, people would look at your job and think what it's like to be in his position. So there's almost that trying to balance you telling someone and them trying to think what you're doing as well. So how do you go about making sure that you're always given the sort of best possible, setting the scene and because, as you said, no matter where you are, whether it's League Two or a World Cup final, you always have an audience who are interested in what's going on the screen. So how do you, sort of get over them hurdles of really, really selling a game to someone?
Well, I think that I mentioned the preparation. When I do the preparation, there's always something to hang a game on. I'm, quite fortunate these days that most of the matches I do are quite big games. So it's quite straightforward. But even when they're not, there is always something. There's always something there that makes the match interesting. And it's, I never forget that. That's always your starting point when I'm commentating on a match. And I think as well that just retaining the enthusiasm. You know, if I ever, and it's very, very rarely, I will think of it as a chore, and I'll think, I don't really want to go there. I very, very rarely think that. So therefore, there is an inbuilt enthusiasm for doing it and going places. I love variety. I love going somewhere different. And yeah, that's what there's always, you know, I think once it starts becoming a chore, and I think I'm very fortunate doing the job that I do, and it's kind of unusual that, you know, I'm a BBC staff, which means that I'm not freelance. I don't have to, this job right now, I don't have to go and cover, you know, whatever league it is on a Sunday night in a studio in, you know, wherever. I don't have to do that. And I often think, what effect would that have on me? Would that affect my enthusiasm for doing the job? And I think it probably would. So I kind of feel very lucky to be in the position that I'm in.
Yeah, and I think that's a great lesson, you know, even outside of the industry, to just pure enthusiasm can get you so far, and it's clearly worked so well for yourself, John. I wanted to ask you about interviewing. In terms of interviews, you know, you start off in the industry and you're interviewing, you know, some not so well-known names, but then as you know, progress, you go to Premier League managers, you know, players and people that are at the top, very, very top of their profession. Do you still get nervous surrounding, you know, speaking to people in the industry and having them conversations?
Yeah, it's funny you should touch on that, because that's the area of the job that I find more difficult. And you know, it's not my primary job. My primary job is as a commentator, but you know, I will fairly often find myself in a position where I am interviewing people, and that I don't get nervous commentating at all. I get excited. But I do get nervous about interviewing people, interviewing footballers. And I've never been entirely comfortable doing that. And I find it very difficult to ask the right questions. You know, I mean, that's basic. That's what you've got to do.
Can you think of any names that come to your head where you've stood in front of them and thought, oh, I'm not sure?
It's just, I mean, it should be very simple. It should be very simple. And John Inverdale, I remember always telling me, the only thing you have to do, I mean, he's a brilliant interviewer. You know, there are loads of brilliant interviewers. And I remember John saying, the only thing you have to do, the only thing you have to do when you're doing an interview is get the first question right. Because if you ask the first question, then what you do is just naturally continue the conversation, i.e. listen to what they say and respond to that. However, I often find that I'm in a position whereby, you know, if it's Gareth Southgate, for instance, you know, there will be a number of things I feel I have to ask. And I find the mental process of doing that and at the same time listening to what they're saying, it's very difficult for me to do. I don't know whether it's just not a straightforward process for me to do that for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I'm the exact same. I find it really difficult to juggle the fact of, you know, yes, of course, you have to respond to what they're saying because it will look like a bad interview if you're not, you know, bouncing off them and so forth. But also you have to push them in things and ask them certain topics. And so my then question to you would be, how do you overcome that? How do you keep it going whilst also making sure you get the right stuff asked?
But also it's a bit like, you know, I think, as I said to you, commentating, I think, suits my personality, or the way that I commentate suits my personality. Whereas pushing someone in an interview doesn't suit my personality. Yeah, I accept that. That's the way it is. And so therefore, I'm always trying to be fair to people, and ask questions in a way that is fair to them. And that's not always straightforward because there is often a pressure to put people on the spot.
And John, just a few quick fire ones before we wrap up. Who's the best player you've watched in the last 5-10 years?
It would have to be Lionel Messi.
I mean, there's not really much explanation needed for that. What about the best stadium you've commentated at recently?
That's a tough one because there are lots and lots of favourites. I always really, really love Allianz Arena, Munich.
Best atmosphere you've been a part of?
Two was pretty good. Hamden Park, Scotland, England is pretty good.
I mean, that's pretty hard to beat that one there. And just last question, John, if you could give one piece of advice to anyone breaking into any industry, you know, whether it's sports or outside of sports, what would you say?
My advice would be that as a football commentator, my advice would be now more than ever before, you have so many facts and statistics and numbers that are very valid that you would want to include in a commentary. And sometimes I think it's easy to be drawn into too much of that. And for me, what is always more important is what is in the commentator's mind, what's in their imagination. Words for a commentator are more important than numbers. And any individual thought that can come out of your mind, I think, is always more interesting to listen to than numbers and stats.
That's great, John. Thank you so much for your time today. Honestly, I really appreciate speaking to you, and I've learned so much today.